We've got a lot of information we're going to be going over today. This is going to be more like a classroom. It's going to be fairly high speed. I want you to don't try to absorb every detail. Absorb the concept. There's videos online. I've got websites where you can go back and address the details at your leisure. Don't feel that you've got to take every note and get everything down. You know, we've got resources for that. The issue we're going to be going into today is, how many people believe we've got a problem in America? And that's why we're all here. I mean, we all know there's a problem. And the issue is you cannot properly ascertain what the solution is or what the remedy is until you ascertain what the real problem is. And what I'm going to tell you is we have never been presented the real problem of what it is. What I'm going to present to you is that Abraham Lincoln was a nationalist, and slavery was his tool or his pretext. And that's the modern thought, because actually, as Garland was going over, and we'll go over a little bit more, slavery wasn't even a pretext at the beginning of the war and didn't become an issue until later on, because it sounds good. You know, we've got to cease looking. We've got to go back and revisit 1860 to 1870. We've got to revisit that time frame and look at it from now we're taught to look at it from a moral perspective. And we need to look at it from a political perspective. What was really going on politically? And was slavery used then and still used today as a tool to maintain the real issue of what it was about? And again, what I intend to prove to you is that Abraham Lincoln was a nationalist. When this nation was first founded, did they create a national government or a federal government? They formed a federal government with certain national aspects. Certain enumerated, limited authorities. But it was a federation. We had a federation. But the states weren't totally sovereign in that status. They wanted to operate as a nation. This federation wanted to operate as a nation in the family of nations of the world. And we wanted to be able to treaty with them. Within our own internal borders, we wanted to coin our own money. We let the federal government help with communication, with post offices and stuff like that, to do things of this nature. And to protect us as a body, because, you know, if Georgia was attacked by Spain, okay, would it be up to Georgia to defend himself? No. We want to look at the national aspects of the Federation to come together to protect Georgia with a national army, national military, national navy. So we want to look at that context. What I'm going to prove to you is we went from a federal form of government with certain national aspects, a federation with certain national powers, to a nation with national powers. And the problem we have today is we got a federal constitution which has states' rights and all these things reserved to the states, operating in a national actuality. And it doesn't make sense to us, and it confuses us, and we think there's issues. This is our United States Supreme Court case, and this is just a good statement that I think is apropos for where we're at. It says, progress generally begins in skepticism about accepted truths. Intellectual freedom means the right to re-examine much that has been long taken for granted. A free man must be a reasoning man, and he must dare to doubt what a legislative or electoral majority may most passionately assert. The danger that citizens will think wrongly is serious, but less dangerous than atrophy from not thinking at all. Our Constitution relies on our electorate's complete ideological freedom to nourish independent, responsible intelligence and preserve our democracy from that submissiveness, timidity, and herd-mindedness of the masses which would foster a tyranny of mediocrity. Thought control is a copyright of totalitarianism, and we have no claim to it. It is not the function of our government to keep the citizen from falling into error. It is the function of the citizen to keep the government from falling into error. The last sentence above the highlighting, thought control is a copyright of totalitarianism. Do we have thought control today
Yes.
in political correctness?
Yes.
And sensitivity training to get you to think differently? Because obviously you're thinking wrongly. We're in a totalitarian society where our thoughts, our children's thoughts, their ideas and beliefs are being manipulated by the system. They're not being handed down from their parents. The system is engineering a people out there, and our children are the products of that. We're in a very serious situation right here. Got a crime report I want to talk about here. The reported crime is the Constitution's been violated, state rights vanished without a trace, federal government is exceeding its limits, all traces of God are being censored, scrubbed, and removed from public view. The crime spree is causing widespread panic and agitation. Rumors and confusion are reaching pandemic proportions. That's why we're in here. We are a confused people. We don't know what's going on. And so we've got to get the knowledge it takes to get our freedom back, or our children's freedom back. Primary suspect, Abraham Lincoln. 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Date of birth is 2/12/1809, white male. Crime suspected is usurpation, inciting violence, tyranny. And this occurred on April 12, 1861. His known aliases are Honest Abe and the Great Emancipator.
The post office picture.
That's what it's supposed to be. This is not, hang on a second, I just got to make it. Well, hang on, I'm going to have to escape here for a second. I'm not getting my preview up here. This is just well, okay, well, I'll fix that later. Okay, on the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses, he who is to die shall be put to death, but he shall not be punished to death on the evidence of 1 witness. This will be my 3rd visit to you. Every matter must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Using principles by the Lord tells us, biblical principles, let's just get a couple witnesses to testify for us. This is a Senate report, 93-549, came out in 1973. And it says this: a majority of the people of the United States have lived all their lives under emergency rule for 40 years. Freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have, in varying degrees, been abridged by laws brought into force by states of national emergency. It says, and in the United States, actions taken by the government in times of great crisis have, from at least the Civil War, in important ways shaped the present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. The Constitution operates in one of 2 modes: emergency and peacetime. Emergency is, well, peacetime is when the Constitution is in full force and effect. Emergency is when they have to deviate from it a little bit, like during a war, and you don't have a right to privacy because they've got to, do what it takes. The issue is how do we get back to peacetime. This is 1973, saying that we have a present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. How many people were taught that in school? I graduated high school in 1975, so I'm right in the middle of this, and it's like, I didn't know. Can I remedy it if I don't know it? Answer is no. Later in this document it says, the President, with the approval of Congress, is thus used as authority for extraordinary actions, laws which have no real relationship whatsoever to existing circumstances. As a consequence, a national emergency is now a practical necessity in order to carry out what has become the regular and normal method of governmental action, what were intended by Congress as delegations of power to be used only in the most extreme situations, and for the most limited durations, have become everyday powers, and a state of emergency has become a permanent condition. Permanent condition. Suspension of the Constitution, a permanent condition. This is a Republican Governor's Conference in 1994. We met in Williamsburg that year, and they came out with this document. It says, here and in other colonial capitals, the nation's founders first debated the idea of independence and the fundamental principles of freedom. Then the challenge to the liberties of the people came from an arrogant, overbearing monarchy across the sea. Today, that challenge comes from our own federal government, a government that has defied and that now ignores virtually every constitutional limit fashioned by the framers to confine its reach and thus guard the freedoms of the people. Got two witnesses here. The United States Senate. The people on that committee were Adlai Stevenson III, Charles Mathias, Frank Church. If you know anything about your politics of the time, those were heavy senior senators, not a junior committee. This is the Republican governors of all the Republican states in the United States saying the federal government doesn't operate within its limits. Do we all agree? That's a fact.
Yes.
Yes.
It's established. Is the Constitution the fundamental law of the land, upon which no law or action can violate?
Yes.
What do you call someone who violates the law?
Criminal.
Congress.
What I was saying is not.
So we got an issue here. Was the Constitution of the United States designed for a national government or a federal government? We talked about that a little bit ago. Let's just read the Federalist Papers. This is Federalist number 39. It says, each state ratifying the Constitution is considered as a sovereign body, independent of all others, and only to be bound by its own voluntary act. In this relation, then, the new Constitution will, if established, be a federal and not a national constitution. It is a constitution for the Federation. It's not a constitution for the establishment of a national government. It's certain enumerated, limited authorities that the federal government has. Now, well, we'll go back for a second. Also discussed in the Federalist Papers is they discuss, well, what would a national government look like? If we had a national government, what are the characteristics of it? Because we're going to, Madison is going to state what it is. And I want you to be reading those words and say, does that look like what we got today? And then number two is that the intention of our founders? He says this, the idea of a national government involves in it not only an authority over the individual citizens, but an indefinite supremacy over all persons and things, so far as they are objects of lawful government. Among a people consolidated into one nation, this supremacy is completely vested in the national legislature. How much is reserved to the states by that statement?
None.
None. Completely vested in the national legislature. And remember, Congress in the Constitution says that Article 1, Section 8 says Congress can pass exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over its domain. Of course, they originally said not to exceed 10 miles square, but it was also included any territories or properties that they might get. But it goes on, it says, in this relation then the proposed government cannot be deemed a national, since its jurisdiction extends to certain enumerated objects only. Claims that we're going to make here is Abraham Lincoln was a constitutional nationalist who wanted to implement that, where everyone would be under the control of the national government. Is that how we feel today?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we got.
Lincoln was a nationalist. Slavery was his tool. Okay, so Abraham Lincoln was a constitutional nationalist and not a constitutional federalist. He wasn't honest and he was not an abolitionist. Abraham Lincoln was inaugurated as president March 4th, 1861. The 36th Congress proposed an amendment on March 2nd, 1861. Right here. It says during the second section of the 36th Congress on March 2nd, 1861, 2 days before Abraham Lincoln takes his oath of office. The following proposed amendment to the Constitution relating to slavery was signed by the President. It was actually signed by Buchanan. But let's just go down to the bottom of what it actually says here. This is the proposed amendment. It says, no amendment shall be made to the Constitution which will authorize or give to Congress the power to abolish or interfere within any state with the domestic institutions thereof, including that a person is held to labor or service by the laws of said state. It's totally addressing slavery. That's a phraseology they use. This amendment is proposed 2 days before Lincoln's inaugurated. This is Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address. That's his handwriting. This is the actual document, his handwriting. And he's going to address that right here. And you'll see I got these highlighted words in here, and we're going to superimpose what's said over the top of the actual line. He says, I understand the proposed amendment to the Constitution has passed Congress to the effect that the federal government shall never interfere with the domestic institutions of the states, including that of persons held to service. To avoid misconstruction of what I have said, I depart from my purpose not to speak of particular amendments, so far as to say that, holding such a provision to now be implied constitutional law, I have no objection to its being made express and irrevocable. He said that in his inaugural address about that amendment. He has no problem with slavery being permanent and irrevocable from the national perspective. Abraham Lincoln had to justify the war. He was quite the talker. Abraham Lincoln was out of Illinois, and we have other talkers out of Illinois. But he had to give his reasoning to invade these southern states. He did this before Congress on July 4th, 1861. What I want you to do is look at what he's saying, and seeing is he promoting nationalist ideas or federalist ideas. And just think about it. What was Lincoln's reasoning for the war in saying secession was a crime? The founding principle of this country that was well understood is that all government of right comes from the consent of the government. Okay? All government of right comes from the consent of the government. What did Abraham Lincoln do? That's a crime. You guys cannot choose your form of government. All government of right does not come from the consent of the governed. All government of right comes from the consent of Congress and Abraham Lincoln and permission to leave. You cannot do it on your own. Is that pretty much the same position that George III took to the American revolutionaries? You cannot leave this. You have to fight for it. So just the opening concept, Abraham Lincoln is destroying the founding principles of this country. He says they, the southern states, invent an ingenious sophism. And sophistry is sophism, that's defined right here. Sophistry is subtle, deceptive reasoning or argumentation, an argument apparently correct in form, but actually invalid, especially such an argument used to deceive. So he's saying these southern states wanting to leave the Union and have their reasoning that they have a right to alter their form of government. He's saying, you know, that's sophistry. That's just deceptive reasoning. He says the sophism itself is that any state of this Union may consistently with the national constitution, notice I said the national constitution rather than federal, and therefore lawfully and peacefully withdraw from the Union, which is what secession is. Secession is a formal withdrawal from an organization, without the consent of the Union or of any other state. In other words, these states are saying this lie that they've got this authority to leave the Union without permission. Well, we're not giving them permission. Is that in line with the founding principles of this country?
No.
The Declaration of Independence is a secession document. It's the formal withdrawal from the Crown, giving the reasons why. It says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands. tied to you anymore, which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them. This is a document on separation, political separation. Now, legally, what was the Declaration of Independence? It's an indictment against the crown for violating their duty. They call the king a tyrant. And we're going to go into the definition of tyranny here a little bit later. The crown had violated the rights of the people, and they violated every petition of redress. The function of government is to guarantee and protect the rights of the people. Our founding fathers said, you're not guaranteeing and protecting our rights anymore. You have abdicated your position as having authority over us. You are here to enslave us, not to protect our rights. That's the legal justification they use, which is on solid legal foundation. That the security of these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute new government, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Founding principle: the people have a right to alter their form of government, change it. Again, Abraham Lincoln's speech to the House of Representatives, January 12, 1848. This is his handwriting. What did Abraham Lincoln say about secession, the concept, in 1848 in dealing with the Mexican War in Texas? Right, here's the words: any people anywhere, being inclined and having the power, have the right to rise up and shake off the existing government and to form a new one that suits them better. This is the most valuable and most sacred right, a right which we hope and believe is to liberate the world. So, 48, 58, 13 years before he inaugurates war on people who want to shake off an existing government, he's saying shaking off an existing government is a right. He's violating his own conscience right here. That's his handwriting, his words. The seceders insist that our Constitution admits of secession. Article 7 of the Constitution: ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. The Constitution of the United States was drafted. A lot of people get upset about how it was drafted in secrecy and all that. I personally have no problem with that. I would have a problem with it if they did it in secrecy, ratified it, and it was imposed on everybody. But it was not. They just proposed it, but then they sent it to the states so the people could debate it, discuss it, decide on it, hold a convention, and decide if that was a form of government they wanted to alter to, which they had a right to. Okay? So let's look at that process. Here's the ratification of the United States Constitution. Here's the process. The 1 through 9, at this point right there, that's enough to create a new government called the United States of America. How many states are in it? 9. Okay? But Lincoln was saying, well, if one state leaves it, if we've diminished the total number of what we got, it's going to destroy everything. No, it's not. That was a lie. We were more than willing to go from 13 to 9 right here. More than willing. But because of time, how long it took people to go places, the Constitution doesn't go into effect, or, well, this is when it goes into effect, but by the time they inaugurate it, Virginia and New York, 11 of them, have ratified the U.S. Constitution. February 4th, 1789, George Washington is elected president. March 4th, 1789, that's that March 4th date again. The United States government meets for the first time, and George Washington is inaugurated. How many states were in the United States of America when it was inaugurated? 11. So does diminishing the total number of the United States of America destroy it, or alter it, or harm it, or is it a principle that's so far beyond anyone's scope of being a bizarre or criminal concept? No. It's happened. We did it. This is how we did it. North Carolina voted November 21st, 1789. We were out 8 months after George Washington was inaugurated. We were a foreign country, not politically tied to or associated with this other entity a foreign country. Rhode Island didn't adopt it until May 29, 1790, 14 months later. Now, did it say once we get 9, then we're going to get an army together and go conquer the others that haven't decided to come in? No, it's all free will. People have a right to choose. Now, let's look at the prescribed method for secession. How did the southern states secede? Article 7 of the Constitution. Let's look at the Constitution. Now, it says how can we secede from the Articles of Confederation, and see if the southern states use the exact same method in the Constitution. South Carolina held a convention, December 12th, voted to secede. Florida held a convention, Alabama, Georgia, all these, they're using this exact same prescribed method in the Constitution that's recognized by all these people. Is that, and what did Lincoln say? The sophism is that these states can leave the Union and that the Constitution admits of secession. You know, basically saying the Constitution does not admit there's a right of secession. The Constitution clearly is a secession document. The Declaration of Independence clearly is a secession document. It's the formal withdrawal from a previous political alliance. He says the express pledge by each and all of the original 13 in the Articles of Confederation that the Union shall be perpetual is most conclusive. That is the wording in the Articles of Confederation, that the Union would be perpetual. Okay? Absolutely. Let's look at that. Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. It's in the title. The term perpetual occurs 5 times in the Articles of Confederation, and it's in the title of the document. Article 13 of the Articles says, and the articles of this confederation shall be embodied, be observed by every state, and the Union shall be perpetual. Very clear language. But under the Constitution, the term perpetual was dropped from the Constitution of the United States and appears 0 times, and the federal government and Union created under the Articles of Confederation, in fact, was not perpetual. That document, does this wording in the Articles of Confederation somehow or another magically bind the people away from the right to alter their form of government? Does it? Yes. The people, oh, no it doesn't. The people always have a right to alter their form of government. If it becomes a tyranny, they have a right to alter it. Because our founders, this perpetual union, they seceded from it. They left it with the Constitution. The rights of the people is the highest authority. Not words on a page. The people are the sovereign bodies. This document is not a sovereign document. Because it's a piece of paper. Because all these governments are staffed and organized and operated by men, and now you got a philosophical belief. Is man inherently good, or is man inherently sinful? If man were inherently good, then you could do this because all the people under it would be good. Man is not inherently good. They're always going to be seeking more power. They're always going to be manipulating people, and the people need a way to get out from underneath them. Otherwise, the government is the sovereign, not the people. And tyranny, absolutely. Abraham Lincoln says this: much is said about the sovereignty of the states, but the word is not in the national constitution, nor is it, as is believed, in any of the state constitutions. Is this an attorney? Yes. Does he have resources to read 30 some odd constitutions? Yes. He has a little staff. He can do it himself. It's not hard. I did it. I'm not even a president or a lawyer. Let's just look up the history of the word sovereignty in the United States. This is the Paris Treaty of Peace, September 30, 1783. This is where the Crown recognized the colonies to be free and independent states. Article 1 says, His Britannic Majesty acknowledges the said United States, names them all individually to be free, sovereign, and independent states. And he treats them as such. Crown recognized every state to be free and sovereign. Articles of Confederation says each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right. It goes on. Federalist Papal 39, we read this earlier. Each state ratifying the Constitution is considered as a sovereign body. Constitution of Massachusetts, you have to swear an oath. Massachusetts, the right ought to be a free, sovereign, and independent state. It's in the Massachusetts Constitution 3 times. Vermont Constitution, representatives so chosen that they shall have all powers necessary for the legislature of a free and sovereign state. Georgia Constitution 1798. And this convention doth further declare and assert that all the territory without the present temporary line and within the limits aforesaid is now of right the property of the free citizens of this state and held by them in sovereignty. Yes. Unalienable, but by their consent. Tennessee, they came in after the original 13. Article 32, contained within the charter limits of this state over which the people have the right of exercising sovereignty. What's the word sovereignty mean? The lawmaker, the highest authority upon which there is no authority higher. Now, in reality, they're not totally sovereign. God's the sovereign, but they recognize God as the sovereign.
Correct. He makes us sovereign with the next.
We're sovereign. We're given domain over the earth. And we have certain sovereignty we can exercise as long as we don't violate our sovereignty.
Yeah.
How strangely were the tools of a tyrant to pervert the plain meaning of words. His whole argument to wage this war was lies.
Yeah.
Not true. The question was asked earlier of how did this happen? How could this have happened? How come the people didn't get cranked up about it? Goes back to, is man basically good or is man basically evil? Will we sit idly by while great crimes go on? Is that part of human nature? It absolutely is. Do you consider abortion a great crime? What are you doing about it? Sitting idly by, just like they did when Lincoln was taking over these states. We do it. Was the invasion of Iraq a crime?
Yeah.
Did they have weapons of mass destruction? Shouldn't we have just said, oops, my bad, we're out of here? No, we said, oh, well, we're here, we're doing a little regime change and kind of do some other stuff and kill a bunch more, you know. We sit idly by and watch this stuff. It's within our nature. We do that. Think of Germany in World War II, attacking all its neighbors. Think of what the people did with the Jewish citizens. Sit idly by, they know what's going on, these great crimes. This is what we do as humans because we are inherently sinful. This is a famous quote of Abraham Lincoln that you'll actually see printed a lot. When they talk about how great of a man he is. It says, the people are the rightful masters of both Congresses and courts. Not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow men who pervert it. How many people have seen that quote? See, I see it all the time. It comes across. What speech did he? What was he talking about? Well, this is the speech. Again, I got his handwriting. And this is the quote right here I just read, which is actually at the bottom of the paragraph. And now I'm going to read what's written up here, because what constitutional violations is he talking about? We must not disturb slavery in the states where it exists, because the Constitution and peace of the country both forbid us. We must, and he crosses out a word, not withhold an effective fugitive slave law because the Constitution requires it. And then he gives that famous quote, which we'll go back to and see what he says. The people are the rightful masters of both Congresses and courts, not to overthrow the Constitution, but to overthrow men who pervert it. And he's talking about people who would not support the fugitive slave laws. Those are men who want to pervert the Constitution. Abraham Lincoln was a constitutional nationalist and not a constitutional federalist. These are claims. Abraham Lincoln was not honest. Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist. Now, I say it's a true fact. How many people here believe that that was not well established? It's well established. He was a nationalist. Everything he talked about, states were nothing more to him than counties are to a state today. You don't have a right to go anywhere. You know, does a county in Georgia have a right to secede? No. But did it come in as a free, sovereign, independent state as a county? Well, no. This was part of the body originally. Let's go to the object of the American Civil War. Garland hit a little bit on it. We'll go a little bit more. Whoops, go back. This is what passed Congress. Resolved, the present deplorable Civil War has been forced upon the country by disunionists of the southern states, now in revolt against the constitutional government and in arms around the Capitol. That in this national emergency, Congress, banishing all feeling of passion or mere resentment, will recollect only its duty to the whole country. That's all the flowery words. Here's the actuality of it. That this war is not prosecuted upon our part in any spirit of oppression, nor for any purpose of conquest or subjugation. Remember those two words right there. Conquest, it's not for that. Because he's got to convince New York farm boy, Ohio farm boy, Vermont farm boy, are you willing to fight for this cause? How many people have heard people say, well, the war was about state rights? Anybody heard that? Yeah. Okay, what about state rights? New York hated their state rights so much, they said, yeah, we want to abolish our state rights. We don't like our state rights. Was it to overthrow state rights or to preserve state rights? According to this, it's to preserve it. But then we got to go to actuality of what it was about. Because it ended up overthrowing all state rights. Because this is a lie to the New York soldiers. Every New York soldier, every federal soldier who fought that war, put their lives on the line, their graves were spit upon by the United States Congress. Because everything in here, what the war was not for, they implemented. Every item. So it's not for any purpose of conquest or subjugation, they ended up doing that, nor for the purpose of overthrowing or interfering with the rights or established institutions of those states. That's slavery. It's not going to overthrow the rights of the states or the institution of slavery in any states. Did it overthrow the institution of slavery? Well, yeah. But to defend and maintain the supremacy of the Constitution and all laws made pursuant thereof, and to preserve the Union with all the dignity, equality, and rights of the several states unimpaired. And well, that's just kind of a sum up of what it was not for: conquest, subjugation, overthrowing, interfering with the rights or established institutions of the states. Now, why do they have to say it's not for the purpose of overthrowing the established institutions of the states? 30% of the slave states fought for the North. 30%, just under 30%, of the slave states fought for the Union Army. Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, Missouri, and then West Virginia, when it entered the Union as a slave state in 1863. 5. How many seceded? 11. Roughly a third. Tyranny. This is out of John Locke's works. As usurpation is the exercise of power which another has a right to, tyranny is the exercise of power beyond right. So usurpation would be if there's someone who is a sheriff, and I go in there and illegally get him booted out and I become the sheriff, I usurped his office. I'm a usurper. Tyranny would be totally criminally going over there and, I guess, shoot the sheriff and say, I'm the sheriff now. That's terrorism. That's tyranny. There's a difference between tyranny and usurpation. Usurpation is usurping someone else's authority. Tyranny is doing something you have absolutely no right to do. Usurper, tyrant, both or neither. This is our prime suspect. Let's do a timeline of the object of the war. March, April 1861, Lincoln declares 7 southern states ordinance of secession null and void based upon the position that states cannot leave the Union. July 1861, both houses of Congress passed resolutions clearly stating the object of the war is not for any purpose of conquest or subjugation. April to May 1865, the Confederate Army surrenders to overwhelming opposition. So the war is over in April, May 1865.